Welcome to the Political Hobo Hub PowerPoint slideshow presentation. This three-part episode will examine race and gender inequalities in modern-day Britain. In this presentation, we will outline how racial inequalities continue to affect British Black and ethnic minorities. This presentation contains upsetting and explicit language, and the analysis is based on a young socialist point of view. Listeners are advised that this presentation may well offend and is entirely unsuitable for kids. Racial inequalities and injustices sadly resonate within Black and ethnic groups acutely due to socio-political and economic pressures. So this slideshow illustrates how this has profoundly affected one particular individual whose story will be examined alongside statistical research evidence regarding Black and ethnic minorities' lives in Britain. The Black female who we interviewed is a Windrush generation descendant who was born and educated in London, and her story will be included as historical evidence of her own personal experience of racial prejudice and discrimination. However, for personal reasons, she prefers her name not to be revealed. So in this presentation, she will be known as Faye, and her voice is disguised to protect her identity. Faye's parents, a happily married couple, traveled to England from the Caribbean 10 years after the historic HMT Empire Windrush ship arrived and docked at Tilbury Docks. What they sought for themselves was a chance for a better way of life, but what they found instead was a country divided on the lines of race and gender. Faye is searching for answers to her predicament and is now ready to speak out to find a better way of life by any means necessary. But so far, her life has been nothing more than continued disruption, and her pursuit for a structured career path has brought her nothing but mental health issues. However, Faye is still determined, as always, to carve out a space of harmony and unity with the wider community. This presentation will herein encompass Faye's past and present experience of racial prejudice and discrimination alongside reports made by governmental inequality agencies, particularly regarding employment, pay, wealth, qualifications, housing, and employment. The job of social inclusion agencies is to seek unity within the borders of the United Kingdom, but this task is growing more precarious as the ongoing cost of living crisis continues to create economic instability. Overall, what this slideshow confirms is that Faye's story and social research analysis is that prejudice and discriminatory practices remain to this day a huge part of British societal interaction. The aim of Political Hobo Hub is to show Faye that she is not alone and that her arrested development was not in vain, and that there are other ways that she can still be a productive British citizen. So, what does racial inequality mean? Racial inequality refers to the unequal treatment and access to resources, services, and positions within a society based on race or ethnicity. It manifests in disparities across various sectors, including housing, education, employment, income, and healthcare. This inequality is often a result of systemic structures that perpetuate the status and privileges of the dominant racial group while limiting opportunities for minority groups. The concept of racial inequality is rooted in racism, which is defined as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism against individuals or groups based on their racial or ethnic protected characteristics, which is aimed typically towards minorities or marginalized groups. It is important to understand that racial inequality is not just about individual acts of prejudice, but is deeply embedded in the social, economic, and political systems that shape our societies. In other words, racial inequalities are systemic in British institutions. So now that we know how racism operates in society, what can we do about it? Well, social scientific researchers say that addressing racial inequality requires acknowledging and dismantling these systemic barriers to create a fairer society for all races and ethnicities. Going by statistical analysis, Black British people and ethnic minority groups particularly fall into this category as they experience extreme prejudice and discrimination in employment, pay, wealth, and housing.
An annual briefing white paper described how racial discrimination continues in every employment sector. White ministers or parliament who have agency with racial inequality were appalled to read in astonishment that on average the unemployment rate among white people were 3%, while unemployment rates among people from Black ethnic minority backgrounds 13%. When Faye was asked long periods of unemployment and what were the reasons behind her employment, she replied that she had experienced long periods of being in and out of work from when she left school in the 1970s, and that back in the day, the types of work that were available to her were shop work that had her replenishing stock on the shelves and cashier till work, but she got moved to another department and was promoted to a product demonstrator function, which meant that she had to prove her worth by selling the product. However, when product sales went down and she could not retain stock, she found herself out of a job. She said it was not fair for her because being the only Black female in the workplace meant that she had to prove her worth by selling a product, while the others lived off the proceeds of her excellent business acumen. Additionally, she goes on to say that she was always stressed out from working in a shop for 9 hours a day, where floor supervisors watched her every move and made rude comments about her fashionable clothing choices and skin disorder. So, what Faye's experience proves is that she was moved without being officially appointed to a position that she didn't want to perform, which made her anxious because she had to work on a low wage to sell luxury items which are hard to sell while on commission. Furthermore, she wanted to be promoted to floor supervisor, but she did not get that job when she applied and did not get an interview or reply instead. But she was immediately transferred to another department without a job interview. This situation happened before the Equality Act of 2010's employment law, which makes indirect discrimination against law. So in hindsight, we now know we have the legal framework in place to help her out of a tight spot. But this does not excuse the way her hasty transfer to another department made her feel something was wrong, and this upset her immensely. Faye said that not getting that job really upset her because she thought she was more than qualified to perform the job adequately. And with the added stress of rude comments about her clothing sense and her skin complaint, this really played on her mind. The employment law has still some way to go to rebalance the problem with workplace prejudice and discrimination, and pay gap between race and gender are increasing even more. So here is a brief overview of the pay gap situation in Britain. The pay gap between black and white workers is remarkably high, with black British ethnic minority groups experience an average pay gap of anything between 22% and 86%. This means that the highest wage earning white worker is earning between 22% to 86% more than a black worker, right? But there is more to understand about pay gaps than what meets the eye when trying to make sense of pay gap differentials. A report commissioned for Job Center Plus in 2022 explains that pay gaps refer to the differences in average earnings between different groups of people. They are often discussed in the context of the gender pay gap, which is the difference in median pay between men and women. This gap can be measured in various ways, but commonly it's calculated as the difference between average hourly earnings of men and women as a proportion of men's average hourly earnings. Bear in mind that this does not include overtime pay that workers rely on to make up for being low paid, which inevitably means longer working hours to make up for the differentials in pay gap. So now that we understand gender pay gap differentials, this is how statistical researchers work out what sorts of social influences causes pay gap variations. Let us look at the stat on gender pay gaps. It has been recorded that pay gaps are influenced by a range of factors such as occupational segregation. Occupational segregation is where black and ethnic minorities often work in different occupations which can have different levels of pay. And in terms of work experience, the different factors are that men typically have more continuous work experience, which can lead to higher pay. While on the other hand, working hours for black and ethnic minorities, as outlined in the previous slide, are more likely to be part-time work, which are often pays less per hour than full-time work. But when it boils down to education and skill levels, basically a lack of education and skills may affect workers' future earning capacities. Finally, looking at discrimination, Women who face discrimination in the workplace should know that this may arguably affect their pay and career progression. An additional brief note to this information is that in Britain, the gender pay gap for full-time workers is entirely in favor of men across all occupations. However, the gap varies by age, with a small gap of younger ages that widens from age 40 onwards. However, the UK government has introduced compulsory reporting of the gender pay gap for organisations with 250 or more employees to increase awareness and improve pay equality. It is also important to note that the gender pay gap is different from equal pay for equal work, which is about ensuring that men and women are paid the same for doing the same job or work of equal value, and that the pay gap report also reflects the overall position of women in the workforce and society, and not just a picture on comparisons of pay for similar work. What does all this evidence mean in terms of moving to a better paid job? All this evidence means is that understanding and addressing pay gaps is crucial for achieving a fairer workplace where everyone could earn equal pay based on their skills and experience, regardless of their gender or protected characteristics. However, a recent Trade Union Congress report confirms that Black, British, and ethnic minority groups who are graduates are paid on average 23% less than their white counterparts. And a study published by the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of Essex found Black, British, and ethnic minority graduates were between 5 and 50% less likely to be employed than their white British peers 8 months after graduation. Faye has a degree in humanities and to this day cannot find suitable graduate work since graduating from university in the late 1990s. So, what has Faye been doing for work after graduating in the 1990s? 2 years after graduating, Faye could not find any suitable work from the job center, and as she was under enormous pressure to find work by the job center's employment officer, she found local work as a factory machine line packing assistant. She says that the wages were low and the work conditions were grueling, and she had to work an alternating 12-hour morning or evening weekly shift pattern. Faye hid the fact that she had a degree from her workmates in embarrassment and fear that someone might make a scene out of this fact. Being in this job was the lowest point in her life because she had taken a semester in women's studies at university and found out about the suffragettes' women's rights movement regarding the vile working conditions and indifferent treatment of workers. But now she found herself in a similar position of potential danger. After a year of this unrelenting shift pattern, Faye could not perform the work pattern anymore and resigned with immediate effect. Nevertheless, Faye knew she had saved enough money from this horrendous job and used that money to find her dream job. Look at wealthy business practices. The term wealthy generally refers to individuals or entities that possess a substantial amount of money, property, or valuable assets. The definition of who qualifies as wealthy can vary based on different factors such as location, economy, and societal standards. In the UK, for example, to be considered among the wealthiest part of the population, an adult would need a wealth of around £670,000 per adult, including physical possession, to be in the richest of families. Wealth of £105,000 per adult places someone in the top half of the population. In comparison to wealth, 40% of people from Black, British, and ethnic minority groups live in poverty, while around 8% of the white population are rich and travel the world in luxury. It is argued by young socialist theories that the workers are not finding work because the wealthy business owners find workers' labor input, particularly in factory shutdowns, a waste of money and inadequate source of labor, as technologically advanced machinery are cheaper and more efficient. This is one of the reasons why workers find it difficult to contribute back to the economy. Also, Black and ethnic minority workers are not being given a chance to prove themselves because of the pay gap differentials, which have already been discussed in the employment slide. As for Faye, she relies on state benefits, and as the cost of living increases, she is paying more for food and essential items. She does not have any savings of significance to move on, and being older, she's now tackling employment age discrimination. Young people from Black ethnic groups in England are likely to go on to higher education than average. However, they are less likely to obtain high grades, enter prestigious universities, end up in highly skilled jobs, study further, or have career satisfaction. However, there are also marked differences in higher education entry rates between people from different Black ethnic groups and between men and women. A House of Commons research briefing on Black pupils and students' socio-economic conditions suggests that lower academic achievement and retention rates among Black students may in part be due to pupils' lower socio-economic background, which could affect their level of academic preparation. Equally, even after taking into account such things as academic preparation and socio-economic status, Black university students continue to underperform and graduate at lower rates than white students. We asked Faye about her girls' school experiences in the 1970s. She said,
"Back in the 1970s, I was taught at a school for girls, and the teachers taught me maths, English, science, religious education, physical education, and music. But I did not pass CSE graded exams because the other girls would tease and bully me for having a skin disorder. It was the constant bullying and teasing about my skin disorder which made me unable to concentrate on my studies. One of my tormentors would call me by what my skin disorder looked like and then make friends with me to bully me into doing stuff I did not want to do, such as go stealing fashionable clothes from the local department store and getting me to smoke cigarettes at 14 years old. This bully was the worst kind because she would make up vile names for the other pupils based on the way they looked. So, for example, if a pupil had a nose like an eagle's beak, then that pupil would be teased for having that characteristic. This situation made me depressed, and also I was always out of class visiting the skin disorder doctor. After I had left school, it was just the thought of not having any qualifications that stressed me out the most. But while at home, my dad was on at me to find work to help my family's impoverished circumstances. I could not find immediate employment, so I applied to go to college for further education. But I got bullied and physically assaulted by another student for no apparent reason. So, I left college immediately after this happened to me. I was now upset, unqualified, and frustrated because I wanted to make something of my life. However, after leaving behind education and resigning myself to being unqualified, I found shop work, and after work finished, I would pay to attend adult education evening classes. This is where I found friends to socialize with and discuss what we had learned that evening. And after 3 years of evening classes, I was awarded 2 diplomas which helped me access higher education.
Sophie had a rough start at school, and she managed to make up for it later by going to evening classes for further education, which was a good idea, and she had a lot of educational catching up with her career aspirations. Her pursuit for further education was a good move, particularly so because she was living in impoverished home conditions where both her parents were out of work, and as such, every penny counted so that food could be placed on the table. Although Faye did not need to have traditional qualifications such as O-levels and A-levels to get into university, she was accepted onto the Bachelor's of Arts in Humanities degree course, which is an access course aimed to address educational inequalities in the Black community. Faye was asked why she did not tell the teachers about being bullied at school.
The teachers were unapproachable and were always looking for faults in pupils' behavior rather than talking directly to me about any concerns I had in the playground. It was as if we were in separate worlds from the teaching staff. There were no real interaction on a personal level going on. Teachers would attend the class and stand in front of the blackboard and write on the board the lesson plan, then handed out the question sheets, and that is it. They would not check whether we comprehended the question correctly or helped us solve English or mathematical questions. We had to figure it all out on our own. I always remember the French teacher writing French on the blackboard and then walking out of the classroom saying that she had to go to a meeting and leaving us all to our own devices. The French teacher leaving the room did not help matters much because instead of studying, the other schoolgirls ended up talking about everyone's business and cornrowing each other's hair instead of learning French. The lesson ended with still no sign of the teacher.
So, not only was Faith getting bullied, but the teaching staff really did not care enough to find out what was going on in terms of pupil interactions. This is a sad situation to listen to, because the bullying behavior towards Faye was able to continue because the teachers did not really care enough on what was happening or what was being said in the schoolyard. Teachers leaving pupils unattended is the worst kind because vulnerable children are open to abuse, bullies, as well as listening to inappropriate conversations. The only code of behavior that teachers were looking for in terms of faults were whether the F or the S bomb words were vocalized out loud. Part 1 of this slideshow on racial inequalities has come to an end, and next time on Political Hobo Hub slideshow, there will be explanations on the lack of action to tackle racism, poverty of aspiration, as well as women and ethnic minority groups inequalities. So, until then, thank you for your time and attention, and farewell.